Welcome one and all to the Success Curious podcast. It's your man Andy here, and we have an official record maker, record breaker, first two-time guest on the Success Curious podcast, and I am absolutely honored that the great, the enigmatic, the inspirational Dominic Thurbon has joined us once again. Now, team, Dominic is the executive co-founder of Alchemy Labs. They are a thought leadership tank alongside his better half, Emily Heath. And I tell you what, between them and their counterparts, they really are questioning so much stuff that needs to be questioned, but very few people have the ability to do two things. One, interpret it in an intellectual way, but then be able to broadcast it in a consumable way. These are the special ones in the game, of which there are very few in the game of life. And not only that, he's about to go tackle possibly the hottest potato topic ever right now, which is the topic of truth. He has his book coming out soon, To Be Honest, going into bookstores as of March 31st. It is all about challenging what it is to be honest, what it means to be truthful, what the hell truth even means these days, given everything that's going on in the world. I don't know about you, gang. I'm super excited to be getting my laughing gear around it, and you should be too. Dom Thurbon, thank you so much for joining me, my man. How the devil are you?
I'm back. Thank you so much Thank you so much for having me for round two. This is such a treat to be here. I am stonkingly good. Thank you very much. And delighted to be back in the Success Curious house. Yeah, absolutely great to be here. And thank you for those very, very kind words of introduction.
Oh, look, I could have waxed lyrical for yonks about you, Dom. You know that. But the truth of the matter is, we've got some serious stuff to talk about now. Now, gang, we'll just get the formalities out of the way, and it would be interesting to compare the last definition to this one and see if it's changed or evolved or tweaked in any way, shape, or form. Dom knows what's coming, but team, I have this firm belief around the definition of being a successful human. It's about success, connection, influence, and happiness. 4 components, all coexisting with each other in a wonderful little ecosystem. But Dom Thurbon, for the second time, what is your definition of a successful human?
I'm not going to play the game here. I'm not going to try to repeat myself, but if I do repeat myself, it will just look like deeply authentic and aligned consistency. I don't think I've ever given the same answer to a question twice. Let's see how we go. But I maintain, I think I said something like this last time. I think there's 2 parts of the definition of success. I think there's the part that everyone would probably agree on, which is successful people can set and meet their goals. So I want to be the world's best auctioneer, to pick something at random, considering I'm sitting opposite one of the world's very, very best auctioneers. They have the capacity to visualize that, to set that goal, but then to do the things required to get there. I just want to be the best wife in the world. I just want to be the best husband in the world. I just want to be the best dad, to be able to set that and then do that thing. But I think the second thing that we don't spend enough time talking about is really successful people also set goals worth wanting, because I don't think all goals, all definitions of success are equally worthwhile. They might be equally passionate, like people might feel that they're really passionate about them, the same thing. But when Ted Bundy sets out to be America's most successful serial killer, I think that might be like his definition of successfully meeting those goals. I just don't think we should want to emulate that. So maybe it's the second part of the definition isn't so much only about success, but I think the most successful types of people don't just pursue success; they pursue success worth wanting. Frankly, and we can definitely talk about this later, if you ever get a word in edgeways, because I'm ready to go at this pace for an hour. But I reflect back on some of my own professional experiences. I think some of the times I was least happy are some of the times I was most objectively successful. Like I was earning the most, I was the most senior I'd been in my career, I'd kicked goals. I was quote unquote more objectively successful by just meeting and reaching goals definition. But I was fundamentally the least happiest I've ever been. And I think for me, it wasn't success worth wanting. So those are my two things. That might be totally different to last time, Andy.
It's actually there or thereabouts. I don't think we brought Ted Bundy into the conversation, but I think at some point we brought Hitler in.
That feels right.
Yeah,
That
I
feels
think.
right.
But it's really interesting, like the goals worth having, right? So you know, it's always a constantly evolving process, right? You know, and I'm really keen on looking at that sort of dichotomy of success being something that is ever evolving, and ever flowing, and sort of mapping that against something as binary as truth. Or is truth binary, right? Like, you know, and this is the thing, right? So I'm really interested in digging into that. But yeah, mine's evolved slightly too, and it's sort of variations of a theme whereby for me it's I've been saying that it's a human in flow up until very, very recently,
Beautiful.
and made it very succinct in that regard, because what you are and who you are is in alignment, right? But I think the component that I reckon I might be missing with it, you could actually have a look at all the various religious texts, right? Because irrespective of what race you run, you know, and irrespective of you know, the common opinions and uneducated opinions around differences of one religion versus another, and so on and so forth, they've all got the same aim. They've all got the same aim, which is to be of service to a higher power, right? That is the same goal, right? And I think for me, looking at that sort of conclusion that, you know, they're all wanting the same stuff, right? It's just that we can't understand how each other gets to it, right? Or, you know, whatever. We're not going to go into that. But for me, it's a human in flow acting in service. And I think that for me is probably that little component at the end for me is probably very much in alignment with what you're saying there about goals worth having, for sure.
It is. It's, I think, arguably an even nicer articulation of it. This idea of being in service. So I went to a Jesuit high school,
Yep.
and the Jews. I'm not religious myself these days, but I adored my Jesuit upbringing. I really, really did. I extracted so much, even from a secular perspective. So there's so much richness and wisdom in so many of the religious texts, and St. Ignatius of Loyola. And I, again, sorry to go the religious thing. As I say, I'm not religious, but it is really beautiful. St. Ignatius of Loyola had this this notion of in his case, it was very gendered, but he said being men for others. That was living a life where you are a man not for yourself, but a man for others. Or I guess if he was alive today, he would have said a person for others. And this notion of there is something bigger than myself, and being in and of service to that thing. When you look at the research on happiness, I think the empirical evidence bears this out. People are at some of their most durably satisfied and happy and fulfilled when acting in service of something bigger than themselves. And I think one of the things that's so beautiful about the way, this is one of the reasons I love the Success Curious podcast, is so many of the conversations you have on this show, I think, either very explicitly in some cases or just implicitly in others, call people to think of a larger definition of success than we have traditionally thought of. And this notion of what is it that you are in service of, there is great science behind the impact of answering that question well.
Big time, man. Big time. You know, and if you find the thing that puts you in flow, then you're of your highest power, shall we say. Therefore, you are of the highest level of service that you could possibly be. You just got to find where it needs to be there, and from there on in, right? You know, and make sure you can point it in the right direction. So now, Dom, I'm really interested though to talk about this topic of being honest, right? Because let's be frank, team. Although, you know, he's Dom and I'm Andy. Let's both be frank for a second. It's very, very obvious that the world is challenging the perception of what truth is, right? In various forms, right? Whether it's your political injustices or whatever, whichever sort of persuasion you are of, whether it is identity, honesty, identity truths, right? What is our truth? Are we being truthful to ourselves, and are we being the truest version of ourselves, and blah, blah, all that sort of jazz. There are so many things that are being thrown up in the air right now, and at the core of all of it is what's true, what is honest, what is the reality, as it actually is. Honestly, I fried my brain thinking about it last night a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah. It does that. It
Yeah,
really does do that.
it
Yeah.
did. It threw me for a loop, because I'm like, right, well, but then is truth subjective versus, is there a binary definition of truth in any one given situation, right? Is there such a thing? If there is such a thing, then how can truths be debated on a political floor? It's just like, I like my mind
The
just went bananas.
conversations get very, very big, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And but this is one of the reasons, by the way, another one of the reasons I love your show is most people don't want to have this conversation. They just want to say, like, oh, what's the tool tips for a leader, the 2 tips for a leader to be more honest? And that's super important, and we should talk about that at some point. But what you've just said there, to me, sits at the heart of so many of the most pressing and urgent problems we've got, which is the very core of the concept of truth is not something that we seem to agree about anymore. And at that point, I think we potentially run into the one fact we can all agree on is we all live in the same world, right? We might have very different views about it, but if we don't have the capacity to have shared conversations about a shared version of what the world is, then we can't ever agree on what it should be. Like, you can't have an agreed destination before you've got an agreed departure point. And so I think it's like putting in a destination in Google Maps, but you refuse to tell it where you are. It's like, I can't draw you a map if we can't agree on where we are.
100%.
And so, yeah, this is a huge convo, right?
So before we get stuck into the meat and veg of it, why did you feel a calling to make this happen? Why did you feel, and how long, and how why did you feel you needed to do it? How long has it been bubbling in you for? And what was the nudge?
That's a really lovely question. I'll give you the quickish answer to it. So there were 2. I would also use the word calling. I felt like I had to write this book, if I'm completely honest. And there were 2 things. So the first is the moment. I was on holidays with my partner, Dr. Emily, who you know well, and who has been a guest of this salubrious house. And I was writing a different book. I was writing a book called Who Stole the Fun? And it was about why work seems to be so hard when it should be so good. And it was going to be about our relationship to the modern workplace and well-being at work. And I was in a hotel bar, and it was during the 2024 US presidential election. And I was watching a debate actually between reading about a debate between Trump and Harris. And what's interesting is everyone says, oh, Trump, what a liar, right? And that's true. PolitiFact found that only 3% of his statements in that presidential campaign were true, right? So that's pretty bad. Kamala Harris, only 12% of her statements were true. Right. So we were not choosing between truth and lies. We were choosing between lies and more lies. And I was furious. And I threw out my book. And over a few glasses of red wine, wrote a 2,000-word outline for what came to be the book called To Be Honest. And it's about why and how we make truth happen. And so that was the first moment. But the second thing was, the more I started doing the research, and this was not long after you and I were up at Elite Retreat on Hayman a few years ago with those incredible agents up at Elite Retreat with Sam McLean and the crew. Around that time, the thing that was becoming clearer and clearer to me is so many of the problems I feel like we diagnose and treat in business every day how do we build trust with our customers? How do we build engagement in our team? How do we survive and thrive in a world where AI, something I know you talk about a lot, like AI is changing what it means to be, say in that case, an agent or whatever, but really whatever role you're in, what it means to be a consultant, what it means to be an accountant, what it means to be a lawyer, so many of these problems that we're dealing with and struggling to deal with are what I would refer to as second order problems. And actually, the first order problem is that we're finding it very hard to have honest conversations about those things. And so I think it was blind fury that led me to the book, if I'm honest. But I think the more practical reality was I feel like a bad relationship with truth is the problem that gets in the way of solving all the other problems. And if we can master our relationship to truth, I think we find our pathways to success, whatever that means for each individual, open up quite dramatically.
Mm. There are loads of people that would have these sorts of problems, though, or have these sorts of observations, or, like the world, get really frustrated that, it doesn't look like any political leader knows their arsehole from their ear roll at the minute, right? And if they did, they'd probably lie and tell you that one's the other one, right?
I regretfully and regrettably agree with that assessment, yes.
No, it's such a horrible picture, right? Anyway, I'm doing that a lot at the minute, Dom. I've got the most vulgar bloody analogies coming out of my head. Just ask the missus, like, seriously, man, it's not good. Anyway,
it's the world doing it to you, mate. It's not you doing it to the world.
It's weird. Anyway, so I want to know though, why you? Because loads of people get angry about it, but very few people step up. Why you?
Yeah, it's a really challenging question, and it is one I've asked myself, because one of the I will arrive and answer that question in 2 sentences, but just quickly to get there, I was talking to my publicist this morning, and 2 things have become clear. Quantitatively, loads of people are interested in this book and this topic, right? It's media has been really interested in it. Conversations like this one, people want to talk about it. They want to hear it. Quantitatively, people are interested. Qualitatively, it's very divisive. Frankly, I think I could have picked an easier topic, if I'm completely honest. And because I should have just talked about how to implement AI, and everything would have been much simpler. And so I've been puzzling myself a little bit. God, why did I choose to pick what could potentially be a fight when much friendlier topics admit? And I think I think there are 2 reasons it had to be me. One, I genuinely feel like I had no choice. It's funny, and I would be interested to see if you have the same thing. I feel like sometimes when you arrive at a certain idea, the idea has you. You don't have the idea, and I was like, this topic needs to exist. This book needs to exist. I'm doing it because I have to do it. I felt genuinely compelled to write it. I think the second reason that's slightly more pragmatic is, so anyone who's listening that knows me, and certainly you, Andy, would know, as serious as this first kind of 5 minutes of this conversation has sounded, I have trouble taking anything more than 51% seriously. Like 49% of me is always like, yeah, but we should just laugh and get along and have a good time. And I just kind of want to play video games and watch football and like go and have a beer with my mates. And so I'm really happy to laugh at stuff, including myself. And I think that's a useful, when you know that you're going to be wading into an area where there's going to be a bit of disagreement, I think not taking yourself too seriously is a little bit of a superpower. And I think the capacity to be super comfortable that I'll get stuff wrong, I'll have strong opinions, but all it will take to get me to change them is like a good argument. And I'm, as was once said, I'm so determined to be right that I'm happy to just change my mind all the time. Yeah. I think those qualities mean I'm might be, and time will tell, but I might be a useful messenger in this regard, because I think maybe hopefully we can not just have the serious conversation, but take the piss out of ourselves a little bit while we're doing it, which I think might be helpful when we're talking about serious stuff.
Well, it can. I mean, look, I kind of sort of half mentioned it, gang, when I introduced Dom at the very start of the show, when I said he takes intellectual stuff and makes it consumable, and he's just explained why, right? So essentially, and you know, it's the understanding that you've got to know enough to know that you'll never know enough, and
Oh yeah.
Curiosity over judgment, I think, is at the heart of all of what Dom's doing. And it's going to take someone. I mean, look, and the one thing you didn't mention, mate, because you are about to go Wimbledon in, right? You are, and you're going to cause a lot of conjecture, and there's going to be, you're going to be putting your sticks into all sorts of bees' nests and hornets' nests and stuff like that, right? And FYI, I'll be stood side by side. Don't even stress about that. We'll go bananas together.
Race to see which one of us gets cancelled first.
Yeah, maybe, but yeah. But I think it takes, it's that bravery piece that has been sadly lacking in society generally, right? There are so many incredible, unbelievably brave people in the world, and yet there is still the need to conform to popular opinion, right? There's that desperate need to fit in, right? Which it's such a, and that's, you could argue that's one of the reasons why all the self-help and self-this and self-that and self-the other came out to play, right? Which is such a detriment to society in the way that it's been broadcast to this point. Because what you're talking about is the fact that, yes, you just belittled your own ideals in, can we not just have a beer and get along, right? But the reality is there's a difference between fitting in and conforming and coming together as one, right? And it's sort of, and it really does lean into a growing obsession I've got around an identity crisis that so many people have got in the world. It's, I reckon it's second to dopamine addiction and the problems that we've got, because there is so much noise that people are forced to process, either consciously or subconsciously, and as a result of that, there's never any space to hear yourself think or feel or be. And and it really does then trigger this whole, what you're doing. Yes, we're looking at it, we've talked about it from a macro perspective, right? But you can't fix the world unless you fix yourself. You can't, like I put it in a sales parlance, you can't sell what you don't know. And it starts with you. If you can't sell, if you don't know who you are, how on earth can you represent yourself in the best possible light to the world, right? You just can't do it.
We buy people first and product second, and it's funny because this is much more your territory than mine, so please correct me if any of this stuff is kind of not on the money. But the way I think about it and the way I understand it is like, when you ask someone why they bought from someone, if you ask a customer why they bought from a salesperson in a situation where they were sold something by an individual, or more pertinently, when you ask them why they didn't buy, they will give you very rational sounding reasons. They'll talk about price competitiveness. They'll talk about shopping around. But when you run experiments to control for a lot of those things, it becomes clear that what's actually happening is they're making a snap emotional personal decision and then rationalizing it after the fact. And they're making judgments about the messenger based on very, very subtle, small social cues about that person and their judgments on their character and whether, and so, things we've all heard, they felt a little slimy. They felt, these very little things, which to your point is like sustainable success for me in a sales setting, exactly as you say, starts with, I want to be very careful with the word authenticity because I think rightly off mic earlier on, I think authenticity is a really problematic word, and you have some extremely compelling views on this, and you should talk about them at some point. But so I think some people may call it authenticity. I think you and I would call it alignment. And fixing is a strong word, but getting getting yourself in a position first where the way you sell is aligned between what's on the inside and what's on the outside. And people think that's like soft skills babble. It's freaking not. It's the difference between selling and not. And you and I are both have a pretty good pedigree when it comes to sales. And I just think people need to talk about this more, because it's not all about freaking touching elbows and doing NLP mind hacks. Like, that's just not where sustainable success comes from in that setting. But that's a hard conversation for people, because it also means some people actually aren't cut out for it, in my view.
Yeah, well, you know, and I really want to bring this back to truth, but like while we're going down this practical path, this is not burning incense and singing Kumbaya. Like,
no,
you don't sell authenticity. You just be, and for a lot of people, that whole buy off people first, product second, it is true, but the problem with that is a lot of people's analysis of that people first, product second has made them see themselves as a product.
Yeah, and that's exactly.
You know
precisely.
What I mean?
It's like it's the right insight with the wrong conclusion.
Exactly right. It's like, well, you're halfway there, but you know. When you walk into a room full of people, you ask them who can tell me what their values are that define their DNA, and not one person can tell you.
Yeah.
You know, there's a problem there. And this is where I want to segue it back to this, to your book, right? So, because so many people, before they can even start being honest with anybody else, they really, really struggle to be honest with themselves, right?
Yeah.
So, through your research and while you were cooking the book, what were the sort of insights that you found? Not only that give us a couple of clues here, but were there insights that made you question yourself with this?
Let me answer that second one first, about insights that made me question myself, because the answer is a resounding yes. In some ways that was fueling a habit, because I'm very, very fortunate in my friend, family, and social circles and my professional circles. I think I'm very lucky to be exposed to a lot of conversations that cause me to quite routinely question myself, and to really, I suppose, interrogate quite deeply what I personally think to be true, both about myself and about others. And certainly in the process of writing this book, that was accelerated, amplified a lot, I think. To your first question about, this kind of, sometimes the hardest place to start with truth is actually the truth about yourself. There's an entire chapter in the book about this, because I think that's an incredibly important observation. I think it might be useful to share one of the things in regards to that came up in the book, which is, to the best of my reckoning, this is novel. What I created for the book, it may have been written similarly about elsewhere, but I couldn't find it. I think it's novel-ish, at least, which is, I think it's worth understanding that there are three very distinctly different types of truth that we have to interact with and grapple with as we bump through the world. Or at least you can categorize all the different types of truth into these three simple categories. So one is what I call them truth. Right. So this is whenever you and I are having a conversation, or people are having a conversation about things that are outside of themselves and their in-group. So we might sit here and go, oh man, like Trump's a problem, or geez, like Albo's not doing a good job, or aren't real estate agents, quote unquote, in the abstract, not you, not me, aren't agents in the abstract, don't they do some problematic things when it comes to, I don't know, underquoting, like all these, like just truth about the outside world that's really about the outside, like, and I mean, like, how many planets are there in the solar system, and what is the structure of DNA? Shit that is just like outside a personal conversation about you and me, them truth, right? And typically people don't find that particularly emotionally difficult to do. Like in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of depersonalized, it's separate. There are certain topics and issues that people might get quite animated about. generally those are ones that have got some personal interaction with. But this is just like the first class of truth, and it's just truth out there. Then there's a second type of truth, which I call we truth, right? So that's when we sit down as a group and we have a conversation about ourselves as a group. So this would be like, like at Elite, say, when it was like, there's 65 principals, business owners, agents, captains of industry in the room, and we sit and we talk about ourselves as an industry, or we talk about ourselves as a business. When I was at EY, I was a partner at EY for 5 years, and while I was there, we did what at the time was basically the largest ever culture review that a company had, public culture review. We got in the former sex discrimination commissioner, Elizabeth Broderick, and we did a huge review of EY's culture. And in an incredible act of truth-telling, our managing partner at the time, David LaRocca, committed to making that entire review public before it even read it. He was like, we are going to do this review and we are going to ask hard questions and then we are going to publish all of it. But that's a we truth, right? Us as a business talk about ourselves as a business. We find that a bit harder sometimes, but it's still not personal, right? That's we as a business, we as an industry are XYZ. And then you come to the third type of truth, which gets to your question, right? Which is what I call me truth. So we've got them truth, we got we truth, and then we've got me truth, which is the conversations that we have about ourselves. Me, myself. What do I really value? What is the impact I'm having? So this would be the difference between, to be really specific about it, an agent saying, in the one instance, they might say, real estate has a problem with underquoting. A me truth would be, I underquote, right? Like, and how often do you hear that one? Because the answer is, pardon my language, fucking never, right? Like, we are so comfortable talking about them and talking about we when it comes to, like, I have met so many leaders who are happy sitting in a room saying, man, we have an inclusivity problem. We need to be more inclusive. I've never sat down with a CEO and they've said, I am leading in a way that is excluding people. Like, everyone was happy saying, we have a problem with racial diversity. I've never sat with someone who says, the problem, I'm racist. Right? Like, we find it so hard. Now, ironically, at the same time, there is nothing as cruel as the things we say to ourselves about ourselves when no one else is around.
Yeah.
Right? You want to see someone at their worst, secretly film them in the mirror talking to themselves. We say things that would get us put in jail if we said them on a street corner to someone else, and we say them to ourselves. So, ironically, also, a bunch of the times those things aren't true, right? In fact, a lot of the time those things aren't true. They're very, very harsh stories that, and if only we would say them to someone else, often they would dig in behind us, wrap their arms around us and say, but that's not true, right? And so, putting aside that situation for one sec, I think that what's at the middle of the bullseye is the book is if we can find a way to invert this thing, to talk least about all the stuff that's just in the world out there. We have to talk about it a bit, right? There's problematic things in the world. But if we can talk about that least and talk about the truths about our own impact, the way we move through the world, the effect that we have on the people around us, not our opinions about those things, but the truth about those things, then we can fundamentally change the game. And we put ourselves in a position to genuinely transform the quality of ourselves as people. And so I refer to that as making truth happen, right? Like moving from truth as a value to truth as a behavior. And I think it's me truths that are the ones that we really need to learn to grapple with. But, oh my goodness, is that a difficult thing to do?
Oh man, it's super difficult. And it's that thing, right, where you see so many people. I mean, God knows how many protests. I've walked past another protest. I mean, here in Wellington, New Zealand, at the minute, gang, as we film and we record. Sorry, and there was another protest down the road. I was so tempted to just ask them to point out on a map where Gaza is, and I know I wasn't going to get a right answer. But their intentions are good, but the problem that we have is that we're too busy trying to fix big problems before fixing me problems, right? Before fixing me, before finding those me truths that make us up as that actually define which bit of the jigsaw we actually are in society, right? And this is just something that you really are hitting the very essence of so much of how so much of the fractured parts of society, how they've come to be. You know, because yes, at the top of any movement, at the tip of any spear of any drive or whatever, there is someone that will have a fundamental ability. They will have the truth as it is pertains to themselves, right? They'll have their truth, but we can't keep going on just ignorantly or naively believing other people's truths when ultimately we would affect the world to such a greater extent and so much more positively if instead of fixing the world we just fix to our world, which starts with us. And what you're
Yeah,
saying, man, is just on the money. It's just
it's a really powerful place to start. I mean, I put a bit of topspin on that because I think you raised some incredibly important points there. And yeah, I mean, we don't need to talk politics and international relations. I think Gaza's a really interesting kind of topic, and I look on in horror at what's going on there. And think back to my Middle Eastern politics and society courses at university under Professor Leanne Piggott, who's just like a giant of that space. And even all the way back then, like there is so much history and it's incredibly complicated, but then there are also urgent and pressing humanitarian issues. And, you know, we can debate the use of the genocide word and differing minds will debate it back and forth. I think there's a really important place for advocacy and protest, and kind of particularly when there's urgent, you know, there's people dying on the other end of those kind of conversations. That's incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
The part of what you said that resonates incredibly deeply with me, though, is I would just hope, I think probably in vain, that what's the right way of framing this? I would really hope that the people taking to the streets are casting as critical eye over the impact of their own behavior on the world as they are about the impact of other people's behavior on the world. And I just think most people don't most of the time. I mean, I don't think I do most of the time. I think it's a really natural thing to gravitate towards just this sense of anger and frustration about them truths, and even the we truth stuff, you know, like this, I wish our industry was better. I just think we need to fight that tendency, you know, and
Yeah.
crucially in the book, I think that the examples of where people have been able to do it well, to really go first with me, to earn the right to advocate about the other stuff by starting first with yourself. Those examples and those case studies show that it is incredibly powerful. Yeah.
Big time, man. All right. So, gang, just to give you a bit of, I probably should have give you a bit of pre-context before we cracked on, because I've not had the fortune of reading his book just yet, right? So I'm going to. And so for me, I want to just throw things at Dom and let him put it through this to be honest filter. Now, this other big one that I want to hit you with, man, is it is the inherent fear of truth, right? The inherent fear of honesty, right? Whether it's ego, whichever way you want to slice and dice, right? Now, one thing that I'm marinating on is when you talk about how, you know, the way that debate, that presidential debate went on, it was 3% versus 12%, you know, and various wrongs don't make any rights whatsoever. And how the world is drawn towards anger, drawn towards action like that because, you know, they're living in fear or whatever. And I really want to get your take on something that's really brewing hard in me, which is it is not become an opinion game. It's not become it's become something greater than this, in which truth is a key component, and it's two very, very big forces of fear and love, right? Where people either operate out of fear or they operate out of love. And I'd love to get your take on the reasons why those people that operate out of love, and this is just me pontificating here, those people that operate out of love, do they have a natural or an ability to be a lot more comfortable with the truth? Or, right, does the mistruth of life still get found or is still represented out of love because of the fact that people can sometimes mistake love for appeasement or, love for the doormat sort of treatment that one puts on oneself, right? And self-sacrifice and all that sort of stuff. So fear versus love, where does truth lie?
I've never thought about it like that before. I love that question. I think my first answer is, I don't know. I don't know. I definitely have some theories and some thoughts on it, but I should say this is about to be, this is not the truth, what I'm about to say. It's very, very much a series of opinions. A couple of things spring to mind about that. The first is I suspect, from my understanding of just kind of behavioral psychology and behavioral science, which is passable but not expert, that I don't think it's right that some people operate out of love and some people operate out of fear. I think it's truer to say, I suspect, that sometimes a person operates out of love and sometimes a person operates out of fear. And I think it's useful to view people's behaviors as a product very much of the environment that they're in. There's this model that Dr. Emily and I talk about a lot, called the DNA of a decision, which is when you look at the way anyone behaves in any situation, there's always this complex interplay of internal factors, our DNA, our emotions, our psychological state, our level of stress, as you were talking about earlier, the level of overwhelm, like internal factors, and then external factors, right? The structure of the environment, the way that incentives are aligned, kind of what's pushing us one way or the other. And at the intersection of those two things, in any given moment, you get choices and behaviors, right? The choice to rail on someone out of fear and anger versus to wrap your arms around them out of love. You can view that as a choice that we make moment to moment, a decision that we make. Those things are just as much a product of the DNA of a decision as anything else. And the way that I think truth comes into those things problematically is this phenomenon whereby we've, I think, accidentally found ourselves, or incidentally found ourselves in a world where opinion and belief have taken on the same definition as truth, right? Where we literally just conflate them. If we even use the phrase, and it's interesting, we've used it a few times in this podcast, and I talk about this at length in one of the chapters you'll read when I finally become a better person and send you a copy of this thing. But
I'm going to come up and get one, mate. Don't worry about it.
This phrase of my truth or your truth that has become very much everyday usage for almost everyone is, I actually think people mean something different when they say it. Because in the way I would suggest definitionally it works is, there's no such thing as your truth any more than there's your mathematics, right? Truth is simply an accurate statement about the world. I think what people really mean when they say my truth is something I have come to believe very, very strongly, and like a core value, a core belief, something that feels very foundational. But our beliefs and opinions aren't the truth. They are beliefs and opinions about the truth, but they're not the truth themselves. But I think what we've accidentally done, and I think a lot of therapy and self-help speak has been casually exported in a way where it's led us all to do the same thing, because I do it too, is we use the phrase truth synonymously with belief and opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that misunderstanding means a very careful thing. Now, when someone attacks a belief or an opinion or just disagrees with a belief and opinion, it feels like they're disagreeing or taking aim at the most important thing in the world because that feels like truth now, when it's actually not the same thing. And so I do spend a bit of time talking about this distinction of kind of just setting up what exactly truth is and isn't and why it is different from beliefs and opinions. But I think some of the challenge with finding a response grounded in love rather than fear is I think we're living in a world where we constantly feel under threat. And we're digging in around our beliefs, digging in around our opinions has become a very important identity thing. And changing your mind or changing your beliefs is seen as a sign of weakness. We feel as though we have to defend our positions so much because they are our truth. Whereas if we were simply able to say, well, that's just kind of like, in the words of the Big Lebowski, it's just like your opinion, man. And able to understand that opinions can be, my brother's favorite phrase, strong opinions but loosely held, strong beliefs but loosely held, can de-escalate conversations in a way that makes it, I think, feel like we have to dig in around it less.
So here's a question off the back of that, right? Because I'm picking up everything you're putting down in a big, big way. Could it be argued then that you have your me truth, right? Which is me, right? But then it pertains to the authenticity conversation that we had off camera, which is like, could you ever be completely 100% unequivocally truthful with yourself and whatnot, right? Really, if you've got any sort of moral compass. But could it be argued then that because there is a perspective on one side, there is a perspective on the other side, that no one is ever actually in ownership of the truth? Truth is always something outside of us.
That is so beautifully put. I agree to the deepest fiber of my being. I agree with that. And this is, I think that distinction actually is really great that you bring that up, because I think it's such an important clarification. Just because the truth is out there does not mean we're in possession of it. And this gets back to the conversation about me truths. It's possible to be wrong about yourself, right? It's there is a truth about yourself. You might not know it. You might either be, the phrase we use, lying to yourself. You might, it's a tricky phrase philosophically the more you dig into it, but colloquially, you might be lying to yourself. You simply might be mistaken. And there's actually tremendously good, genuine neuroscientific and experimental data that shows that we are often wrong about why we do things and the choices we make. We literally, and this starts to get into some of the funky fringes of consciousness and personality psychology, but like we feel as though we're a little subject in our heads riding around all the time that's making decisions and doing stuff. Actually, where largely that conscious voice is just kind of taking its best guess at why we did things and and so this idea that yes, the truth is out there, all we can do is form beliefs and opinions about it, and those opinions might be right or they might be wrong, and we can adjudicate that, and we do have better reasons for believing some things than we do for other things, and it is possible, again, to be wrong. Like it actually doesn't matter how passionately and deeply you believe that the earth is flat. There is empirical evidence. It simply isn't. And the fact that I say it isn't is not what makes it true. The fact that it is true is what makes that true. My belief is orthogonal to the truth in that sense. And so I think this is where humility and curiosity become so incredibly important. The biggest mistake we can ever make is to simply presume that we are in possession of the truth. The even bigger mistake we can make is to think there's a correlation between how much I believe something and how true that thing is. The nature of objective reality exists independently of your personal preferences and opinions.
Yeah.
And I think this is just the humility. This is why the single most important me truth we can learn to speak, the most important phrase we can fall in love with that we all should use all the time, is simply the truth. I don't know. That is so frequently the actual right answer to a question is, I just don't know. And that's okay. And yeah, because otherwise, as you say, I think it can feel like a very combative thing where it's like, well, I've got my truth and you've got your truth, and we just go to war until someone wins. And it's like, I think it's, firstly, that sounds like a terrible world to live in. But secondly, I think the more we can understand that, well, there is this thing called truth, and it is out there, and it is simply the objective state of reality. And then around that, we've got our beliefs and opinions, and that's where we have discourse and conversation and navigate. But we should never conflate. We have opinions about the truth. Our opinions are not the truth.
Big time. And and you know, if you were to take it, I'm very, very mindful of your time, and you could take it all the way up to the tippy top, because even though there are things that are just factually, empirically correct and true and have been proven to be true and all the rest of it, right? It kind of ties in with a question that Eliza asked me one time. My daughter, she asked us one time we were in the car on the way back from school, and she asked us, you know, which one's correct, science or God?
Haha.
Right?
You should do a podcast with Eliza. She's a wise young woman.
Well, you know, we might do it one day. Who knows? Who knows, everyone? Little Easter egg there. But in truth, I sort of said to her, it was sort of one of those ones, because I was driving and I was like, yep, this is the right time to have a deep and meaningful conversation. But anyway, we'll go. And so I sort of said to her, well, the thing is, darling, lots of stuff in science can be proven as fact, right? And the argument that science has is that we can prove stuff you can't. Ricky Gervais said it brilliantly on the Stephen Colbert show, where he goes, you can burn all the books and the science ones will come back the same. The religious ones might come back completely different, right? Right, based on evidence and so on and so forth. However, my argument to that is, ultimately, at the very, very tippy top of science or religion, there is a faith, there is a belief, there is something that is just, someone took a punt one day. It's not like the Big Bang Theory had someone with a camcorder. You know what I mean? Like it's, you know, it's like, ultimately, theory of relativity, theory of evolution, it's all theoretical. As soon as scientists start using the word theoretically speaking, it's grounded in a belief that is, as we've just discovered now, is not the truth. It is a very different thing to the truth. And so the beautiful thing, and this is what I said to her, I said, look, so the really beautiful thing is, darling, whatever the truth may be, you can decide what your belief is. And in fact, I need to correct myself, because I actually think I said at the time, I think you can decide what your truth is.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And I need to
Which is
change
how
that.
most people would say it. Yeah. And I just kicked that, exactly as you just said. I'd kick that into, you ultimately get to choose what your beliefs are, and then we're in lockstep. And those are beliefs about the truth, but they're not themselves the truth.
The beautiful thing, and I think the thing that would make a lot of people feel a lot more comfortable about being curious, about curiosity, and the confidence and the comfort level of being wrong, is that simple fact that no one will ever be in ownership of the truth. And geez, that'll make life so much simpler if we go, right,
Yeah.
we all acknowledge that the truth is somewhere between me and you. So where can we come to a stage where our beliefs around a certain truth can coexist?
And they work. Yeah. Noting that, there's two things to say about that, right? Because I would extend that one step further. Noting that I don't think, and this is now purely personal values and preferences, let alone beliefs and truths, but I don't think life is best viewed as a protracted process of just trying to get as close to the truth as you can. I think life should be a process of optimizing for human flourishing and well-being. We have a few short years on this earth. We might get to run that a couple of times, depending on your religious beliefs and perspectives. It might be setting us up for a life of eternity afterwards, depending on your beliefs. But I think one thing we know is that the only thing we can observe is that we have a very, very short window together. And that there is a difference, as Sam Harris says, between, the greatest possible joy for everyone and the worst possible misery for everyone. There's a difference between those things, and we should optimize as much as possible for a world where we get more of the first one. We shouldn't aim for a world where everyone is just as close to the truth as possible. We should aim for a world that maximizes human flourishing. But the second thing I'd say about that is, and this is where the truth thing does get a little more touchy and complicated, is there are right and wrong answers to those questions. There is as much an objective truth of what works for human flourishing as there is any other question. And there's some answers that are more right and more wrong than others. And there's some where the answer is, man, there's a lot of different right answers to this question, depending on your personality and depending on whatever. But there are objective facts that are true about all those things. And so I think, yes, creating the space to go, well, ultimately, we all sort of get the right to choose our own beliefs is one thing. But that doesn't mean that that some systems don't get us observably closer to the truth than others. So,
Yeah,
so for instance, there's absolutely some people are well within their rights, like we get to hand out rights, but well within their rights to argue that, well, I just believe in intelligent design more than I believe in evolution. Of course, everyone gets to navigate that, but there's no argument that the observable facts are on the side of intelligent design and not on the side of evolution. Do you know what I mean? Like that, because those are simply observations. And so I think I agree wholeheartedly with, we should just find a space where people are really comfortable coexisting. But that doesn't necessarily make everyone equally right, if by right we mean simply, in this case, as close to the truth as possible. So there's some nuances in there, some subtleties in there.
100%, man. And yeah, absolutely. I think, what contributes to the truth are things that are proven as fact, right? And then you'll have a framework of truths, of facts that constitute the truth. And then where it all deviates is whether we decide to accept. It's not even a belief. It's whether we decide to accept that fact or accept that truth, right? And that's I think the gatekeeper there is ego deciding whether we are comfortable within ourselves, coming back to, knowing your me truth, whether you're comfortable in yourself to accept something as fact or not. And so that's really, really fascinating. Now, man, we could wax lyrical for hours.
Can I, just before you run, can I kick one last 20-second thing into the mix there? Because I know you got a hard stop as well.
That's all right.
But that is that last point you make about kind of accepting or otherwise. There's one thing you got the facts, then you got whether or not you accept them. I think that's really important, because one of the points I make very early, and I do think this is not a bad note to end on, we could spend 10 hours talking about, I love these conversations, right? We could spend 10 hours talking about some of those really interesting philosophical distinctions, and I think that's a really important conversation. But the note I'd end on is, I think the overwhelming majority of genuine problems in the world that have truth as a feature of that problem right now are not problems because we have genuine philosophically good faith differences about our definitions of truth. I think it's because people are literally lying and knowing that they're lying. So, when Alex Preddy is shot in the back of their head on the streets of Minnesota, and a senior government official says he is a domestic terrorist on his way to massacre police officers, that is simply not what happened. And it's not that, well, it's all subjective and it depends on where you stand. That is not a problem because we have a good faith philosophical disagreement about the difference of truth. It's because some people are lying. And I think for most of the issues that we need to address in the world right now, it's really not the case that the problem is we disagree about what truth is. It's that we agree about what truth is, and some people are lying to us. And I think that's an important distinction.
big time. Oh, far out, big time. And then we could have, we could have talked. We really, if you want to talk about truth, you got to talk about lying, right?
Hell yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you really, really do. Now, look, man, for the sake of our audience, I think they could do a trip around the world, the amount we talk, right? But I want to just get your final thoughts, with regards to your purpose around this book, you having to do this book. If there was one thing that you would be in hope of, that, should someone pick it up, and you should, is it everywhere, available everywhere, I presume?
Yeah. All good bookstores, online, anywhere you want.
Yeah.
Yep.
Rock and roll. What would be the one thing that you would love to happen as a result of someone consuming your incredible work?
Oh, well, look, if it was a practical thing, I'd love everyone to buy 1,000 copies and for me to retire to a Fijian island for the rest of my life. But if I can't have that,
You get bored, man.
I would actually. That's true. You can only snorkel for so long. I have a really clear answer to this, and it's the one that I am striving for myself as well, which is I hope that what would happen is that people make a personal commitment to cultivating what I refer to as the holy trinity of telling the truth, which are these three human qualities that make truth happen. And the first is curiosity. Curiosity to ask the next question, the same curiosity about your own beliefs as other people's beliefs, to be curious enough to ask the question, I wonder what's true. That's the first quality. And then the second one is humility, right? The humility to accept answers that might challenge your current beliefs, to accept that the answer to the question, I wonder what's true here, might mean that I am wrong about something. And that means I have to deep breath, shock horror, change my mind about something or change my opinion about something. And that I am not my beliefs. I am me. I am not valuable because of what I believe. I am valuable because I am me. And I don't need my beliefs. I can change my beliefs. Humility, curiosity, humility. And the third one is the courage. The courage to actually speak up on this. Vulnerably, humbly and curiously, but the courage to speak up. It's scary. It's hard. You mentioned that yourself. And I think if we can cultivate that trinity of curiosity and humility and courage, we can become forces for making truth happen in the world.
Oh, man, I couldn't agree more. And I think for those that do show courage, we need to tip our cap in acknowledgement.
Here.
Irrespective of whether we believe them or not believe them, or agree with them or not agree with them. The one thing that we first need to acknowledge, that if someone's got the minerals to stand up and talk a belief for the betterment of society, then you just got to tip your cap and acknowledge that first, and then that might allow you to maybe approach that diverse opinion from your own, with a degree of humility, acknowledging that it takes balls to do it in the first place. Right? And then we can all agree on that at the very, very least. Dom Thurbon, yeah, I've said it before, I've said it a million times, and I'll say it again. It's beyond a privilege to be able to connect intellectually and converse with you. Like, it just is. I don't need to buy a lottery ticket because I've already won.
Oh, that's so kind. Well, the feeling is mutual. The feeling is very mutual.
You're just one of the most epic minds that I'm ever going to have the fortune of meeting. And it takes a very, very unique individual to not only have a pink mohawk permanently, but to take this on with that holy trinity that you've just talked about, curiosity, humility, and courage, 100%. You've got all of that and then some. Can I have a bit? But also just than just the awareness. It's not self-awareness, it's worldly awareness that no one is in ownership of the truth, and someone's got to be the first one to say it. And I love you for it, man. I think it's just the most epic thing that anybody could do. I think that anybody that's listening to this is, if you don't do something to connect with this guy or buy his book or listen to a snippet or whatever, right? If you don't do something around this topic of truth and Dom, then that's probably telling you something in itself. That inaction is telling you something that you don't want to admit. So Dom, thanks, man.
That's so kind. That is filled. My heart is very full. Thank you for that, and thank you for having me back as well. First repeat guest. I hope we get to do
man.
round
I don't know
3
if I
at some
should get
point.
you like a little plaque or a medal or something, or
Feel like I'd bottle of scotch. I mean, we can take that offline.
yeah, we'll do that. Anyway, team, look, on behalf of Dom and myself, I sincerely hope that this has made you contemplate a couple of things. If you've been listening to this in the car, I dare say you're probably going to need to listen to this again, because what we've done there is just really scratch the surface of what is one of the fundamental core pillars of life that everybody knows needs to be addressed. On behalf of Dom and myself, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, and we'll catch you again real soon. Take care, gang, and buy this bloody book of his, because to be honest, you're mad if you're not.